Hey guys, this is Blake here. Wow, The Thing is amazing. This prequel easily surpassed, I can't even say it with a straight face. Yeah, I'm joking. It's nowhere near as good as the original. But before I get into all that, just so you guys know, this is one of those movies where critics' opinions are useless. Usually I can tell when I'm going to like or dislike a movie based on critics' opinions. I don't care about like ratings and stuff, but I do care about what they're saying. So for example, even if I read a review of a slasher film by Roger Ebert, if he just makes a point that this is just all gore and sleaze, okay, I'll like it, probably based off that. But then every once in a while there will be a movie that you just can't trust any critic's opinions. Like the Paranormal Activity movies. I love them, for example, but it all comes down to whether they're scary or boring. Everybody's going to have a different opinion there. You can't really take every single asset and break it down. Certain things obviously people are going to agree on. But for this Thing prequel, take the monsters, for example, the special effects. Some reviewers think that those special effects are pretty good, and the monsters are really freaky. Others think that the special effects are pretty poor, and the monsters are really bland. So, I'm just going to say this. Watch the Thing prequel if you want to. It's not, in my opinion, good enough to really sway, people who aren't really looking forward to this, but it's not bad enough to sway to turn people who are looking forward to it into not seeing it. Kind of tongue twisted there. And if you're on the fence, just wait till DVD. I think it's an alright viewing for that. So just so you guys know, I am a huge fan of the original film. Not only that, it is probably my second favorite movie of all time behind Jaws. To me, The Thing is everything I love about horror. It's got perfect build-up and perfect execution. That really is just summing it up. It has great suspense. I love its use of shadows, its creepy atmosphere, its music. But then the monsters, when they show up, are really freaky. And another thing I really like about them is that you never really know what to expect from them. And I'll get a little more into that later, because that's, I think, one of the problems with this prequel. So when it came to this, I wasn't sure whether if I wanted it to happen or not. It was something I thought was doomed for failure, but at the same time, I almost wanted to see another Thing movie just because you don't see a whole lot of movies like that. I love the location, and I love the atmosphere of films that take place in places like Antarctica or any place that's has snow, I guess. It just is a great horror setting to me. But then when the reviews came out, they were more lukewarm, if anything. Like when you read like the Rotten Tomatoes percentage list, it seems like it's more negative. But if you read the actual reviews, most of them were just like 2-star ratings. But at the same time, I wasn't really sure whether or not to believe that because the critics didn't like the original when it came out either very much. So I watched it, and as I watched the movie, I was enjoying it. I thought it moved pretty well. I thought the jumps were pretty good. It didn't really have suspense, but it had enough freaky moments that I was enjoying it. But then as soon as it ended, I was like, okay, that was kind of stupid. First off, the thing you should know is this one is a lot, I don't want to say faster paced, but it's trying to be faster paced compared to the original. It is really, it moves a lot quicker in terms of getting it to the next action scene. But I didn't care for that as much because I thought the original was perfectly paced. I watched that movie right before I saw this prequel and then right after. And I was never bored. I mean, it's an incredibly compelling movie. This one, it's just, quick, let's get to the next action scene and the next monster scene. And while that might be preferable to some people, it wasn't so much to me. The main reason for this is just the whole thing felt rushed. It felt too hurried. With the original film, I could probably name most of the characters because you get the good impression of who these people are based on how they respond to this situation. There's no real character development. I guess there's some, but there's no backstory or anything. You just are watching them, and you just get a good feeling of who these people are. Let's see if I can remember their names. McCready, Gary, Bennings, Clark, Palmer, shit. Childs, Knowles, Copper, Blair. If I'm forgetting anybody, I apologize, or if I'm even mispronouncing some of their names. But they balanced the screen time with all the characters so well that they all became really interesting. And with this one, it doesn't work out. But for one, I think there's a few more people. I could be wrong about that. I never counted. But the only names I can remember are, I think, Lars, Henrik. I don't even know why I remember that one. I think there was a Peter, Kate, Sander. But for the most part, with the last two, I only remembered those names because I had to write a review on them. So I'm not even sure about that. But they have no real personalities. They're just faces for slasher fodder, really. At times, it almost seems like maybe they wanted to flesh out some of these personalities more. Like, for example, Sander's assistant, who's the guy who was in Dumb and Dumber. He has a few scenes where they didn't really need him to be there, but I think they were trying to balance out the screen time. But for the most part, I just couldn't tell any of them apart. I didn't care when any of them died. And they didn't even really know how to use its characters. Like, for example, in the earlier scenes, the main girl, she doesn't really do anything. She's just kind of a standby. And then once she starts taking charge, Sander, who's kind of the jerk in the movie, even though they never really made him that much of a jerk to where I felt he was supposed to be detestable, for the most part, he freaks at her during this one scene, and that's, I guess, supposed to make him the asshole, but I kind of thought he was a little justified. Maybe you overreacted, but once she takes charge, though, he just stops doing anything. He's just there. And none of these characters were interesting to me. I thought the acting was fine. I had no problems there. I actually do like the main actress, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I believe her name is. But she was a little too young, I think, for this role. But she does good considering she had nothing to work with. And the movie never really uses its atmosphere. Like I said, I love the location, but often I almost forgot that it takes place in Antarctica. It doesn't use the cold as much as the original does. It doesn't have as many creepy things in the background. Like somebody running past a door and, mysterious shadows. There's absolutely no build-up. That's what pissed me off about these monsters. Is in the original, like, for example, when the dog transforms, it's this real elaborate, horrifying scene. And this one, they pretty much explode into this mass of tentacles and teeth. And they all look the same, too. That's what I kind of meant when... In the original, you never really knew what you were going to get. I mean, the one scene that freaks me out the most is when the dude's stomach suddenly opens and chomps down on the guy's hands during a CPR scene. And the spider head. I mean, every monster in that movie was different. Whereas in this one, it's just, I don't know, they just grow gaping jaws and have tentacles, and they seemed a bit too strong, too considering. In the original, they were described as being vulnerable when they took their true form. But with the CGI, sometimes it looks decent, sometimes it doesn't. I felt the problem is I actually heard that most of the effects were practical effects. They'd added CGI extensions. Unfortunately, that takes away from pretty much them being practical. I mean, I couldn't tell that most of these were practical effects just from that. But I prefer the effects in the original a lot more. The original had some of the best practical effects I've ever seen. I think just there's much more of a feeling that these things are there, and that makes them much more horrifying. And also, I think just more impressive. Like when the final monster shows its head, that's a really freaky looking ass monster. But in this one, the final monster I thought was the worst. It reminded me of the Scorpion King from The Mummy Returns. You know how they have like this fake The Rock face plastered onto it? Well, they kind of do that with this too, and it looks pretty bad. But for the most part, I was okay with the CGI, and if this wasn't related to the thing at all, I probably would have been more forgiving of it. But because the original had such great effects that weren't CGI, I just preferred those so much more. Anything else? Oh, I do like how they remember all of these things about the original when they visit the Norwegian camp. Like, for example, this movie remembers the axe in the door and the dude who you see sliced his throat, I believe. They remember all that stuff pretty well, but I also think they drew a bit too much attention to it. Like when the axe gets shoved into the door, she says, no, leave it there. And I'm like, okay. They just could have left it there, and I would have been like, okay, that was a cool thing that us fans should appreciate, but they just drew attention to it. It made it almost seem like they're like, oh, see, we remember this. We're really fans. And other times had too many visual and verbal homages to the original that I thought were kind of unnecessary. I hate when movies do that. Like, one thing that drove me insane with Predators is it was full of that shit. Now, I think Predators is still a better movie than this prequel, but that one aspect just drove me insane. And this one can be kind of annoying, too, when it comes to that. One thing I felt like is this movie may have suffered from some real post-production tampering, or maybe it was just rushed into production and that was the problem. Because a lot of this, I suspect, was cut out. The director kept saying that he wanted to capture the human drama that was so prevalent in the first film, but you just never get that here. It just seemed like an action movie where the characters are just, devices to be torn apart and killed. So it wouldn't surprise me if, they have a director's cut that has a lot more fleshing out of the characters. But until then, we'll have to see. So all in all, I just thought the movie was average. It was enjoyable while I was watching it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was bitching about it in my mind. In fact, when I first started writing my written review, I gave it 2.5 out of 4 stars, but I just bitched about it so much, I figured, I must have not enjoyed it as much as I thought, so I just lowered it to a 2-star rating. So, to sum up my opinion, this is one of those movies, if you want to see it, go ahead. It's not bad enough for you to just avoid it because everybody else is saying to avoid it, but it's not good enough that if you were trying to avoid it, then you should watch it. But if you're on the fence, like I said, wait till DVD. I think that's your best bet. So that's it. If you want to read my written review, just check the link in my description. I'll see you guys later.